Welcome to Cannon Chambers. I'm Patrick Cannon, and this is all about stamp duty refunds. So what is a stamp duty refund? Well, a stamp duty refund arises when you make a claim to HMRC for stamp duty that you've overpaid. Now, the most common reasons why you may have overpaid are firstly that you were a first-time buyer, but your conveyancer, for whatever reason, did not claim the relief in your SDLT return. Secondly, you may have bought a dwelling that was uninhabitable, and so you should have paid the lower rates of tax for non-residential property and not paid the 3% higher rates for additional dwellings or dwellings bought by companies. Alternatively, you may have replaced your main residence and qualified for the exemption from the 3% higher rates for additional dwellings, or for a refund of the 3% rates on a subsequent sale of your old main residence. You may have bought a property that consisted of residential and non-residential parts, so-called mixed-use properties, but you mistakenly paid the higher rates of tax for properties that are wholly residential. You may have bought a residential property that consisted of 2 or more dwellings, such as a main house and a granny annex, or a cottage in the grounds, but you failed to claim the relief for purchases of multiple dwellings. And then there's the possibility that you can reclaim the 2% surcharge that non-UK resident purchasers of dwellings in England and Northern Ireland have to pay if you later become UK resident in the 365 days following your purchase. Okay, so what is the stamp duty refund process? Well, the stamp duty refund process differs according to what type of refund you're claiming. For refunds of the 3% higher rates that were paid when you were replacing your main residence, but now fall due because you have sold your old main residence within 3 years, you can make the claim online, and we put the link below for you to check that out. You can also claim to HMRC online when you are claiming back the 2% non-UK resident surcharge because you've subsequently become UK resident. And again, you can see the link we put below in order to do that. For other types of stamp duty refund, you need to make the claim by way of an amendment to your SDLT return. And in practice, this means by post to HMRC. Now, when you do that, you've got to tell HMRC the reason for the claim and include a copy of the sale contract signed and dated by both sides, and also the land transfer, typically the executed form TR1. Now, you must include those, and it's important that they are signed and dated, because if they're not, HMRC may reject the claim and write back to you asking you to obtain copies of the signed documents, and you may then risk being out of time to make the claim. Now, the claim letter should also include a copy of the SDLT5 certificate for your purchase and include a recomputation of the stamp duty to reflect the claim. You also need to include your bank account details in order for HMRC to make the refund payment. And it also helps HMRC if you include evidence of the reason for the claim. For example, in a claim for multiple dwellings relief, it's very helpful to include a copy of the selling agent's particulars with the floor plans, which show HMRC that there were indeed multiple dwellings at the property. Now, a very important issue is how far back can you reclaim the stamp duty? Confusingly, there are various periods in which refunds have to be claimed. The basic period of 12 months from the filing date of the SDLT return. The filing date is normally 14 days after the effective date of the land transaction. That period operates for amendments to the SDLT return. And it's very important to understand that HMRC must actually receive the claim within the time period for it to be considered to have been made in time. So that's the basic 12-month period for claims that have to be made by way of amendment to the SDLT return. Then there is the 2-year period for reclaiming the 2% non-UK resident surcharge. And then if you are reclaiming the 3% higher rates that you paid when you bought your new main residence, following a sale within 3 years of that of your old main residence, then you have 12 months from the date of the sale of the old main residence to get the claim to HMRC. People often ask, what is the 3-year rule in relation to stamp duty refunds? Well, this relates to when you want to claim back the 3% higher rates you paid on the purchase of your new main residence. You need to have sold your old main residence within 3 years of buying the replacement main residence, unless you can persuade HMRC that you were prevented from doing that by exceptional circumstances that you could not reasonably have foreseen. And in that case, HMRC may grant you a longer period to sell the old main residence. However, HMRC are not very generous in granting these extensions and are likely to refuse to do so if, for example, you have decided to let out your old main residence for, say, the first 2 years after you bought the replacement, and then only began to market the old one in the last of the 3 years that you were allowed to sell it. In those cases, HMRC are likely to say that the delay in selling the old one is not due to exceptional circumstances. Now, there's also a 4-year claim period for what is called overpaid tax, but this is of very limited use, and HMRC will scrutinise these claims very carefully, and, for example, are likely to refuse such claims where the claim could have been made within the basic 12-month period for amending the return, but the taxpayer, for example, had not been aware that a claim could have been made. This often happens in relation to multiple dwellings relief, where in the first 12 months the taxpayer was unaware of the relief or unaware that the facts surrounding the purchase could have led to a claim being made. It can also happen in relation to uninhabitable dwellings, where taxpayers are initially unaware that the property purchased might have qualified as an uninhabitable dwelling and therefore for the lower rates of tax. In those cases, HMRC are very likely, particularly based on recent case law, to refuse claims that are made outside the initial 12-month period, but within the 4-year period for overpayment relief claims. You can read more about this area in a tax tribunal decision in which I represented the taxpayer, and we've put the link below to that case. So how do you start a stamp duty refund claim? Well, in the case of the 3% higher rate refunds or the 2% non-UK resident surcharge, you can make the claim online to HMRC using the links shown below. For the other types of stamp duty refund claim, you need to make the claim by post to HMRC, and you can either do this yourself if you want to take care of all the paperwork, or you can ask a professional advisor, such as me, to make the claim to HMRC on your behalf and take care of all the paperwork involved. How long does it take? Well, HMRC operate a process now, check later policy, which means that you should receive the refund within several weeks of HMRC being made aware of the claim. However, it is very important to understand that at this point, even though they make the refund, HMRC have not agreed that the refund claim is valid. And HMRC then have 9 months from the date they received the claim to open a check into it and, if appropriate, request repayment with interest and possible penalties if the claim has been made carelessly or deliberately leading HMRC to make a refund when they shouldn't have done so. This is a very confusing aspect of the refund process, and people think that because they've received the refund, then that's the end of the matter, but it isn't. So I recommend to taxpayers that they set the refund aside for 9 months until you know that HMRC will not be opening a check. Okay, so is there anything else to be aware of in relation to stamp duty refund claims? Yes, a word of warning. Dodgy refund claims companies. Avoid them like the plague. You can read more about them in my blog at the link below, entitled Stamp Duty Refunds Too Good to Be True. The reason for this warning is that HMRC have opened criminal investigations into some of these claims companies, and in some cases the customers themselves for whom the refund claims were made. These people are receiving letters from HMRC's Fraud Investigation Service explaining to them that they're suspected of committing fraud contrary to the Fraud Act and also the common law offence of cheating the public revenue. Now, if convicted, the people behind the claims companies and the taxpayers concerned can receive a substantial financial penalty and or a prison sentence. Now, this is a very serious matter and is extremely upsetting and worrying particularly for the taxpayers involved. I'm representing a number of taxpayers currently under criminal investigation in this probe, and I would advise anyone thinking of making a refund claim, especially for an uninhabitable dwelling, to exercise great care before making the claim. You need to establish that the building actually qualifies as uninhabitable. A few missing slates or a few other things wrong with the building will not mean that it counts as uninhabitable. It has to be truly uninhabitable before you make the claim. The threshold is very high, and if you want to read more about this, you can read the tax tribunal decision in the Mudan case, which I represented the taxpayer. And again, we've put the link to that decision below. Okay, well, I hope that's been helpful and that you've learned more about the stamp duty refund process. And it just remains for me to thank you for watching and say goodbye. Goodbye.